Good evening. My topic is radical thought experiment with human consciousness in number theory. Consciousness is a theory of inner mathematician. Inside our brain, correspondingly, in order to solve hard or not hard problem of consciousness, for number theorists, it's very important, probably, to catch by experiment and thought calculation some kind of what kind of inner mathematician doing and what kind of mathematic he used. It's essential to catch, to describe, to explain this kind of inner mathematician work. Sometimes mathematicians use very trained mathematical intuition, and I'd like to say a story about Srinivasa Ramanujan, Indian mathematician. He was not professional mathematician, nevertheless he had amazing mathematical intuition. He played with mathematical intuition and performed some kind of thought radical experiment in order to extract information about indigenous number theory inside our brain. Very interesting that this kind of question was raised only publication when in my paper. My mathematical result connected with publication in Bulletin des Mathématiques in 1999, where I tried to introduce and to prove an existence of new type of number, periodic perfect number. Periodic perfect number were predicted by Plato, predicted Leonardo earlier. Nevertheless, it was very difficult to explain and justify existence of this perfect number. I used, in order to justify this, I used number which were used Srinivasa Ramanujan in his notebook. It's 1, 4 and product 2, 3, 5. 1, 4 and product 2, 3, 5, 7. Most magical for inner mathematician and for mathematical intuition by Ramanujan, this is this kind of number, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. Very interesting that Ramanujan used mathematical intuitive experiment in order to introduce new conception. But in order to describe what kind of Ramanujan thought experiment with human consciousness could be, I try to describe only two experiments. Experiment by 1915 and experiment 1913. Experiment 1915 was published in 1915 in wartime. It was limited. British mathematicians were limited in funding for publication, full-scale article by Ramanujan. Nevertheless, they had found opportunity to publish only fragment, reduced version of his theory, highly composite number. Very interesting that this is very amazing experiment where Ramanujan play game with two different mental line, to a different mental space, in order to produce new kind of interpretation of prime number theorem, Riemann problem, etc., etc., etc. Interesting that it's very unusual to see what kind of intuition could be used for neuroscience later. In fact, the first experiment, Ramanujan 1915, highly composite number. I'd like to say this experiment, the beginning of experiment, it's very, very simple, extremely simple, unbelievable, maybe even very common. The first, he tried to reproduce the result directly. Number having divisor, only one divisor, plus having two divisors, 3, 4 divisors, divided and we have on, as a result, we have logarithm, and this is Euler constanta. Nevertheless, in 1915, Hardy had found that this result completely false, completely wrong. And Hardy developed a new kind of generalization of this result. He used Bessel equation, and nevertheless, his kind of interpretation was very, very successful. Then, suddenly, Ramanujan started discussion, not a result directly or Hardy in his paper. He started from definition. He made two different attempts. The first attempt in his paper to introduce new kind of highly composite number. Suddenly, he changed his logic, and later he introduced superior highly composite number. Very interesting that in highly composite number is number 4, 6, 8, 9, 10. It's we represent like product of prime factor. 2 in 2, 3, 2 in degree 3, 9, etc. It's very elementary. But nevertheless, inside of this highly composite number, he could found small subset, superior highly composite number. This is number 16, 120, 360, 5040, 33, 3440, etc., etc. Very interesting that in experiment 1915, Ramanujan introduced two different mental line of integrals. For example, the first line, this is highly composite number. Highly composite number theory introduced left to right mental line, where prime, number 1 is prime for Ramanujan, 2, 3, 4, having represented like product of prime factor. Next, prime number, 6, 7, etc., etc. This is left to right mental line. Very interesting that later he introduced suddenly right to left superior highly composite number theory, where indexes 2, 3, 2, etc. must be in opposite directionality. Ramanujan used very rare geometrical sketch. And we are lucky that in this reduced, fragmented, suppressed paper published in 1915, we had found very rare Ramanujan geometrical sketch. Ramanujan represents that there is right to left space where number is increasing from 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, completely in different direction. It was surprisingly, maybe unbelievable, nevertheless, sketch produced by Ramanujan in page number 98 suggested that he thinks namely the same thing. In other words, Ramanujan introduced two different mental lines, moving from left to right and from right to left. He played with these two different mental lines in order to produce new interpretation, a Riemann problem. He introduced new interpretation of prime number. He introduced even new interpretation on Bertrand postulate, etc., etc. Because it's very easy, because we have here in this line new kind of distribution, not prime number, but distribution of composite numbers. Very interesting that this result, very paradoxical, nevertheless connected with his another experiment, more famous experiment 1913. In his famous letter to Hardy, he produced some kind of infinite series, which completely shocking for mathematician. Nevertheless, this is a very trivial result because connected with calculation with negative value for a zeta function. He started from first series in his letter to Hardy, 1 minus 1 is factorial, factorial 2, factorial 3 factorial 4, etc. Convert to 0.596. Later, he introduced the next step. He introduced sum of natural number 1, 2, 3, 4 is equal minus 112. And last infinite series, 1 cubic number 1 degree 3, 2 degree 3, 3 degree 3, 4 degree 3 resulted 120. Very interesting that we translate this cubic number into odd non-negative number. We have the same result, but if we make comparison between two different infinite series, we can find that between first member of set of natural number and the first member of the set of cubic number, we can establish one-to-one correspondence. Nevertheless, we have strangely, unbelievably, against set theory result, because in set theory, traditional, classical, naive theory, set of all natural number and set of all cubic number must have the same cardinal number. Nevertheless, if you have this kind of strange opportunity to make one-to-one comparison, one-to-one correspondence, to establish correspondence between the different members of this so-called set, we can find that set of natural number smaller than set of non-negative cubic number, because 120 bigger than minus 112. This is maybe kind of paradoxical. Nevertheless, this part of famous part of letter to Hardy, sometimes having links with kind of Zeno paradox. Zeno paradox is a paradox produced by a philosopher, not mathematician. Probably it's like attempt to use wrong mathematics to describe right physical problem. Because any mathematical model represents this kind of attempt to translate natural scientific problem into language of mathematics. In the case of Zeno, we have kind of translation problem of physics, motion, into problem of number theory. Zeno used left to right case. 1, 2, 1, 4.
Yes.
1, 8 is a second working 1. This means that we have not paradoxically superior highly composite number. We have only strangely applied to motion left to right highly composite number mathematics. Very interesting. The experiment of what time? 19th century by Ramanujan. Sometimes could be associated with famous Zeno paradoxes. Zeno paradoxes is a kind of mathematical pattern applied to wrong problem of physics. Zeno paradox was produced not mathematician by philosopher. Philosopher from Parmenides school. He used infinite series 1, 2, half, convert to 1 in order to describe physics of motion. Consequently, this is a wrong mathematical model in order to describe physics of motion. Nevertheless, very important for, in our case, to say that Zeno paradox represent only left to right case, left to right arithmetic. As a result, what we can say after, what means is what kind of contribution, what kind of context Ramanujan experiment number 1 and experiment number 2 can be made for current today neuropsychology. I'm sure we can say something real about this. Very interesting that seems to me experiment by Ramanujan, experiment number 1 and experiment number 2, with manipulation of two kind of mental line, can suggest that pseudo-neglect theory in modern neuropsychology maybe is not complete. Unfortunately, is not complete. Pseudo-neglect developed by neuropsychologists is probably very interesting, the most promising conception of modern psychology of mathematics. Pseudo-neglect theory suggests that there is kind of left-handed effect in our cognition when small number we must find or place only in left side, and bigger number, bigger set of objects could be placed only in right side. Correspondingly, we have kind of innate, inherited attitude to play left to right arithmetics. Very interesting that pseudo-neglect effect, completely independent from education, culture, training. Neuropsychology, in particular, Giorgio Valortigara from Italy, and researcher earlier in Sussex University, Andrew Group, had found very interesting experimental proof that chicks, amphibia, chimpanzee, and another non-human mathematician, we can say, use pseudo-neglect as well. This is inherited machine, maybe inbuilt in our brain, which predominant and connected with competition between left and right hemisphere of our brain. We can say, after experiment by Ramanujan, that pseudo-neglect conception is not complete. Unfortunately, in context of our experiment, we can say that mental line left to right must be connected with another mental line right to left, and human consciousness and human mathematics use these two different, completely different, opposite at the same time mental line. More than, we can say that in some sense, neuropsychologists are right. In 2012, and in his review 28, Giorgio Valortigara published a very interesting review about some kind of error, kind of accidental, mistaken observation, where they can be kind of reject pseudo-neglect theory. He had found that chicks in uncertain situation of laboratory can use right to left arithmetics as well as left to right mathematics. Very unfortunately, neuropsychologists have not found some kind of real rational explanation why chicks can use this kind of contradiction, kind of inverse pseudo-neglect. I use the term inverse pseudo-neglect to explain this. Very interesting that maybe some kind of continuation of experimental theory by Valortigara together with mathematician after result experiment number 1 and experiment number 2 by Ramanujan can find suitable neuropsychological experiment which can explain why chicks can use this kind of different opposite mental line of integral. We cannot explain how it is possible. Nevertheless, if Ramanujan right, And if Chick observation by Voltaire is not accident, we must have some kind of very serious, very deep, new kind of paradigm where pseudo-neglect effect could be connected with, could be coexist together with the inverse pseudo-neglect effect. There is, of course, some kind of clinical observation about pseudo-neglect. Pseudo-neglect conception connected with true neglect dyslexia syndrome, where patients have extreme attention to the right side of their mental line, but they ignore or reject object which must exist at the left side. This is true neglect or neglect dyslexia. Pseudo-neglect, it's normal reaction, normal attitude of human and non-human to use left to right mental line of integer or set of objects, where at the left side we have small number, small sets, and at the right side we have bigger number, a big sets. Nevertheless, Ramanujan produced very interesting attempt to play game and to play experiment with numbers which cannot be only intuitive observation or sketch or fragment. Probably highly composite number theory and superior highly composite theory must provide some kind of scientific number theoretical conception which must explain experiments with number by Ramanujan. More than Ramanujan discovery in highly composite number could be connected with new contribution in understanding, not in simplification, in understanding of Riemann problem, probably Riemann problem or distribution of prime number problem could be connected with neuropsychology as well. It's very interesting way. Correspondingly, my last statement, deep Platonic model, this is kind of platform for transdisciplinary dialogue between so different people, between dialogue between number theorist and neuropsychologist. I think it's very important to continue this kind of observation, what we said before. And I think in general, maybe it is very interesting time when neuropsychologists working hardly in order to locate in brain what kind of set of neuron was activated in different hemisphere in order to produce this kind of mental line and mental calculation in chicks, animals, and humans. Very interesting probably to say that deep Platonic model could be connected with another development of new kind of maybe right to left mathematics, because it's easy to see these so destructive results published by Hardy after he received letter Ramanujan. For example, the 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 1 by 12 is a trivial result connected with calculation of zeta function. The first was achieved by great mathematician Leonardo Euler in the 18th century. I think right to left mathematics is something challenging. We cannot find detail of this right to left mathematics in experiment with animals. We can find only new kind of innovative ideas only by introspection, only by Ramanujan-like thought theoretical, thought experiment with numbers. We can continue play this game like many years ago. I simply started to play game with numbers. 1, 4 plus product 2, 3, 5. 1, 4 plus 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. And I was very surprised that I play game in manner of Ramanujan. I have found very amazing word, periodic perfect number. I have found and described 3 periodic perfect numbers. It's probably this style of intuitive or intuitionistic mathematics could be suitable for future. And who knows, maybe this kind of line could be very, very interesting.